No.
Can you hear me?
Louder.
You're not on yet.
Yeah, yeah. Is that correct?
Okay.
Okay. How's that? Is that
That's
better?
better.
Yay, okay. One success of the day. Well, it's a pretty tough try to beat up the wash program that they have for the cars, but we're trying. I am so glad to be here and to see so many smiling faces of people with whom I have worked or contacted in the course of the past few years. I'm interested that you are interested in hearing about Henry Wisner. To begin though, I'd like to acknowledge that the material being presented this morning comes due to the gracious assistance of the Wisner family members. And I should confess that I have been working on this project for a long, long time. And I, of course, as a local girl, find that Henry Wisner was underrated, underappreciated. So today's my opportunity to really shine on him. The Wisner family supplied a lot of very interesting information. The Wisner descendants, for example, still live in Basel, Switzerland. And that was the original home of the Wisner family. And they too were particularly helpful. I mention this because sometimes when you're doing history research, you don't go outside the borders of the United States. And in this case, going to Switzerland was certainly a good move. They have a nice archive of pictures of family members for many generations, and that's kind of nice. As you're aware, as I am, that there are a number of upcoming historical programs going on throughout the county, and I have written my remarks very carefully so that I do not accidentally steal the thunder by including information that I know others intend to use as the basis for their talks. This is just one of the things we historians do. We watch out for one another. We try not to steal, so to speak, their lead material. And you probably know already that in Monroe they're going to be hosting a wonderful program about the document of the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And so we have to tread very lightly when we talk about that today. Also, there are problems planned about the revolutionary campsites. As you know, the revolutionary groups, the militia groups, were going back and forth across our county here, and therefore you have lots of places that are labeled encampments, campsites, and so on. And I find it kind of humorous that in Little Britain, there happens to be a little place called Telford Tavern, where the troops who were coming through happened to stay overnight. And to some people, that qualifies as a campsite. And other places are really genuine campsites. Campsites were very unusual. Some were really places where you had a hospital for the soldiers who were injured. This, for example, is what you had up at Mountainville. If you go out Route 32 and you're on your way to Newburgh, there's a very prominent rise there in Stoneyma, and that was really a hospital for the soldiers rather than an encampment in the sense of being a place where you had munitions and cannon and all of that kind of good stuff. Other items that I know are in the works is one that's naturally going to be held over the cantonment. But in Chester, for example, there's going to be activity regarding the encampment that was there for almost 5 months. And that really qualifies as an encampment because it just wasn't a hit and miss. It, however, doesn't qualify as a biggie because apparently from the information, the coverage for the soldiers were merely tents, while at Valley Forge, for example, they actually had buildings, log buildings, and they also had log buildings over to the Windsor Cantonment. But as I said, I try to be very careful and not crunch on other people's territory. Down further in this county, there are presentations already planned talking about the historic taverns that were the meeting places for both sides. The patriots thought that the innkeeper was on their side, and the loyalists thought the innkeepers were on their side. And so it happens that many of the taverns along the route through the Clove have been the subject now of stories and speeches. So those are in the offing. There are also people who are specialists and are going to be talking about the movement of the troops. And after a while, it's a little bit mind-boggling trying to remember this group and that group and this militia. And of course, the militia are different from the continental troops, and you go, with all of this stuff, but it'll be interesting. And lastly, I don't know if you're aware that this afternoon over at Fort Montgomery, their featured speaker is going to be talking about the loyalists in the Hudson River Valley, not just Orange County, but the loyalist movement. And when you realize that less than 1/3 of the population was really gung-ho about the revolutionary movement, that will be an interesting presentation. I am particularly impressed by the interest of the local family of the Wisners who continue the Wisner name. Sometimes it's the last name, sometimes it's a middle name, like Mrs. Francis Wisner Murray Jr., and sometimes it's a first name, like Wisner Buckford. And so they really have a feeling for history, and that I think that is admirable. I also offer special thanks to my Historical Society contacts. Many of you are sitting right here, particularly those who have come from the Warwick area, and also a core of people that I have developed in libraries and museums, state and national archives, who have really supported my interest. One of the things I do learn along the line, and maybe would be helpful to you, is that if you're looking for material from the Library of Congress, it's advisable to use the service that they say, Ask the Librarian. Well, I have asked the librarian many times, so much so that they almost have somebody assigned to me when I call and make a request. And it's a good service, and it has been extremely helpful. It's perhaps even better than what you get at the New York Historical Society, and I'm sure you probably have been there, or that you get by email or telephone with the New York State Archives. So call the librarian and use the service, Ask the Librarian, because that is very, very helpful. Personally, I'd like to pass along a group of information about a group that is a surprise to a lot of people when I try to help them with history. And that's the group of historical companions that I developed in my association with the company Military Historians. This is an international group of scholars with whom I had the privilege to serve as executive secretary for more than 13 years. And every time I went to one of their meetings, I was surprised because I heard of another source. And the best part was that they knew a lot of sources that were still in private hands. And that is very helpful when you look at the DAR records and they give you just 2 pieces of fish. And then you look at the federal census, well, if you get a line or so, you're lucky. And when you have a contact with a service that it's provided by an organization like the Company of Military Historians, you'll say, why didn't anybody tell me about this before? It would have saved me so much trouble. So I just passed that along as help a little bit for you. The great advantage of it was that this helps sustain not only my personal interest, but it will help sustain your interest. And the Company of Military Historians file goes back 50-some years with articles that are very scholarly, but do reflect what's in private hands, and with the proper amount of persuasion, you can be given access at least to the information. Also, it's not just all military information. There are records that talk about what people were doing, and they often indicate in the text those who are on the loyalist side and those who are the rebel or revolutionary side. Finally, I have been asked, how was I able to find in my own research so much about the spies? And the trick, of course, is that if you go to the New York Historical Society, they tell you, sometimes begrudgingly, about the wealth of information that's there in the documents they have from the British Museum. And over the course of time, this information has been indexed and recorded, and it's much easier now to go through that material. And the wonderful thing about the British material is that the soldiers are asking for money from the government because they dealt with those horrible, horrible, undeserving scoundrels, who are talking about liberty. What's the matter with them? And so the British records are very, very useful in that regard. Not quite as useful, though, are the pension records, which some people think are the be-all and end-all. The pension records are helpful, but since the program to pay money to soldiers or their next of kin doesn't start until 1832. That's a long time from the time of the Revolution, and some people just forgot to put in a request for money, and some of the descriptions you could question because those making the requests are trying to remember what they were doing 50 years earlier. So it has to be used with caution. Well, enough about that. You know how to get a hold of me. A lot of you know my home phone number, which is fine. That doesn't bother me at all. But I'm here really to talk about Henry Wisner. So let's go with this boy. First of all, we have this picture up here that I had never seen until a couple months ago, and it was on the internet. And I was surprised because it was labeled that it was supposed to be a portrait of Henry Wisner of Revolutionary War fame. For 50 or more years, I have looked for a picture of Henry Wisner, and every place I had gone said, well, they didn't take a picture of him, or there's no drawing of him because he was too insignificant. Well, I don't know, but I'm going to track down the person who was the source for this material, for this picture. And maybe somebody in the audience already knows the source of that picture, which is supposed to be Henry Wisner. The reason why I find it suspicious is because of the attire. Usually in the picture of the 1770s, the men's furnishings and clothing are a little bit different. That looks just, I don't know, 1800s looking, but maybe some of you are better arbiters of appearance. Anyway, that's supposed to be a picture of our boy, and here it goes, and maybe somebody can do a little more research, although I'll be trying myself. Henry was born in 1720, or at least that's what the biography of the Congress says. Some people have raised the question, well, we think it might have been 1725. Well, okay, that's nice, but let's work on the fact that he was born in 1720 and move on that way. He died in 1790, and that meant that he lived to the ripe old age of 70. And it was considered a ripe old age if you were still functioning and doing the things that he was doing as we get to the end of this story. The interesting comparison is that in the 18th century it was pretty good if you lived past 50-ish or so. And here this man is working practically up until he is 70. Compare that with George Washington, who was younger than he was, and who only made it to 67 when he died in 1799. And then, of course, there's his good buddy Benjamin Franklin, who was thought to be incredibly old because he lasted until 84. Now, is there anybody here who's 84? I'm sure there might be. Just might be somebody who's out there well put together. We mentioned this. He apparently, from some of the descriptions, have evidence that he was tall, fairly good-looking person, and that he had a number of virtues. So let's go back and get this gentleman into the United States. The person who comes in from Switzerland is John Johann. And when he came in, he goes over to the area of Mount Adam and Eve. And maybe some of you know of that area. Let's see if we can work with this bit of technology here that you handed me. Okay. Now, this is the beautiful Ward Valley area. And the forefather here comes in and he establishes himself with a very large parcel of land. This parcel was so large that it stretched all the way up to the area that we now consider Florida, New York. And if you get in your car and you go from Florida over to Mount Adam and Eve, you see you're going away, right? You know that's quite a distance. So anyway, it was a very large holding. He had a son under, and his son is our boy Henry Wisner. And Henry apparently actually was born in this Florida, New York area. Of course, you have to remember our geography of that time. Goshen was called Goshen Precinct, which was a larger geographical area than the town of Goshen now. Then you're talking about Goshen history. If it's something before about 1788, you are talking about an area that included Goshen, Hamptonburg, Blooming Grove, Cornwall, Chester, Florida, Sugarloaf area, and parts of Rockland County. And I mentioned Rockland County because Orange County was considered, Rockland was part of Orange County, and the break wasn't made until 1798. And when it came to taking the official records from Goshen area here, the court records and property information, not all of it ever made its way down to the lower part, and some of it did. And this is very confusing because when you look through these records, you find that, gee, I better go down and check what they have in Rockland County about Orange County territory. And I mention that because particularly in the southern part of the current Orange County, some of those records are out in Rockland County. And that is, I hope you find a helpful bit of information. Anyway, Goshen then was a much larger area, but it was very beautiful. It still has many parts of the area that are rural like this, and we can see why they might have been enchanted to live there. When Henry Wisner was growing up, he didn't seem to fall in love with the idea of being a farmer, as his father was. But he was a farmer for a while until he discovered that if he were a miller and he took the grains from his neighbors and worked on them in his mill, that he made more money than he would. I see you nodding your head. Yeah, that he would made as a farmer, who have good years and bad years, and sometimes the bad years run 2 or 3 in a row before the good years show up. Anyway, what does he do with his money? Well, he decides to buy some more property. So he goes into the area that we now call Cornwall, and he buys property there. He likes the Goshen area, and at that time the border between Orange County and Ulster County was different, so even going a little ways out of Goshen, you find that at that time you were in Ulster County. But he bought property in Wallkill. And during his lifetime, what he did was to give to one of his sons, Henry Wisner Jr., property in Cornwall because he did a good job of taking care of Daddy's stuff. And he also had a mill in Cornwall, at that time a flour mill. Other property that Henry Wisner gets involved with still exists today, and later on you'll see pictures of where that property is located. Official biographies are kind of interesting in that they tend to indicate where materials are and who the members of his family might be. Henry Wisner had 2 sons and 2 daughters. He had Henry Jr., whom I mentioned got the property in Cornwall finally, and a son, Gabriel. And Gabriel, of course, is known for his tragic death at the Battle of Minisink. And he had 2 daughters. He had Elizabeth and he had Sarah. As his wealth increased, he seemed to invest in more goods, and then he became sort of a philanthropist. He was a very agreeable person, apparently. He, so much so that he caught the attention of the public, and this led to his being selected as a Justice of the Peace. Later, that same personality and diligence led to his, I beg your pardon? Oh, I thought somebody was asking me something. Later, his diligence led him to be a member of the New York provincial government. Henry Wisner was, in a way, a very civic person. He spent a lot of his money, or some of his money, on improving roads, taking care of ditching, potholes, and so on. And part of the reason why he did this was because he was a businessman, and he had to transport his goods from one spot to another. And so it turned out to be favorable not only for him, but for the people in the community. Our next picture, if we are lucky here. No? Oh, there we go. Okay. Somebody by the name of Hope Baird was kind enough to make available to me the family crest. And the reason I bring it in is because it appears that one of the aspects of the personal philosophy of the family was try to get along. And so here this crest says, Amore Nobis. When translated, and Hope helped me on this, turns out to be love, not fight. And as he goes through life, he seems to follow through with this attempt, love, not fight. And yet, he does find that there are circumstances in his life where he has to stand up for his principles and his belief as a farmer who really liked independence, who didn't like to be overtaxed for his goods. And I don't know if that is a familiar image to you, but there we go. The next picture that we have, let's see where we go. This is familiar. This is the obelisk that you have in Goshen. And this was financed by a member of the Wisner family. The motivation being that the family did not want to let his memory disappear. If you were to go now and look at those who were signers of the Declaration of Independence and some of the other documents, you'll find that you don't recognize a name, and there's no way to really document what they've done. And so in 1879, without going through the rigmarole of getting approvals, suddenly the obelisk appeared. Nobody objected, and so there it stands. I don't know, maybe you know, whether that's village property, town property, but anyway, there it sits, and it's opposite of the Presbyterian Church. The obelisk is really very handsome, and I think it's kind of nice that she was trying to ensure that his memory as a Goshenite is recalled. As a Justice of the Peace, which was one of his first civic duties, Henry Wisner put to good use his ability to create peace among disagreeing personalities. At times, this ability irritated his critics, who complained that he was too understanding, and that's nothing where you to be. There's an interesting case in the records in which there is a dispute between two parties. One man is telling the other, you owe me X number of dollars, and I wanted a pound, shillings, and pence. And the respondent was, I don't have a pound, shilling, or pence to give you. All that I have is sweat equity. And so after a bit of a discussion, it was determined that the resolution would be that the person would use his sweat equity to make what do you call it, sleigh shoes. And I'll show you a picture of a sleigh here. Okay, and a sleigh shoe was wrapping around the border here of leather pieces, and the purpose of the leather pieces was to provide a little bit of resistance so the metal would not wear out. And so that's how the problem was resolved. There are other interesting facts in the legal record regarding Henry Wisner and his decisions. A lot of them had to do with ordinary things, like people debating who owns an animal skin, who should get the bounty that they have for wolves and white matters. He also had in his record a few examples of poor behavior, shall we call it, drunkenness, and very ordinary crimes that even today a justice of a peace might deal with. Okay, so here he is, solving one problem, and all that he is doing is aggravating those people who think he should be a tough person. Forget about this kindness bit. Forget about this love bit. What are we talking about? We have to be real men, and we have to be rugged. Anyway, that's what happens there. He had a particular interest in transportation and in animals. Of course, his interest in transportation fulfilled one of his own personal needs. But he also, as a one-time farmer, now miller, had an affinity for animals. And he realized that a picture like this indicated that a horse could pull a small sleigh. But what are you going to do when you have a large shipment that has to go from point A to point B? You can't have a horse or even a team of horses to carry or move a tremendous amount of weight. So what he had to do was make a few decisions, and one of which was to get himself oxen. Oxen, as you know, are castrated, fiery bulls before they are changed. And when they are improved, they become very docile, and they also acquire a tremendous amount of fat and muscle. And this made them excellent animals to use for pulling heavy weights, later on cannon and things of that sort. Also, he knew that donkeys weren't very good. Donkeys were irritable, stubborn, and very difficult at times for the driver to manage. So he recommended getting yourself a fleet of mules. And a mule, as you know, is a blend between a donkey and a mare. And the same thing happened there. The mule was more patient. The mule had tremendous strength. And so we find in the records that when Wisner is being compensated or is compensating others, he is compensating for the services of oxen and mules. You don't hear other animals being mentioned, and we can see why. When it came time during the Revolution for the chain that was being made to impede the Hudson, the descriptions there are very interesting because they really document the fact that the oxen were absolutely necessary to pull these shipments of heavy metal and munitions. So I just thought that I would throw that out. Later on, we're going to see that it is Henry Wisner who is charged by the New York State or by the Continental Congress through Washington that he go out and find a contract with someone who had a forge and to try to get the pieces of iron manufactured. It turns out that Peter Townsend, who had not only a home in what is now Southfield, but he had a home also in Chester, signed a contract, and this is absolutely incredible. He signs it at the beginning of February, and by the end of April, all of the pieces of iron that are necessary for the chain have been manufactured and are on their way to the West Point area and to the point where they would be dropped into the Hudson and be used as a barricade. And so that is kind of interesting. But again, the beast of burden that is preferred are the oxen and the mules. When he was just the justice of the peace, as I mentioned earlier, he was appointed for 10 years continuously to the New York Colonial Assembly. And so from 1775 through 1769, this is pretty much what he was doing. The minutes of the Assembly, which are available, give you a little highlight as to the little issues that were coming up with the Assembly. It was hardly as profound as what you see today. A lot of their time was personal time. You attended the meetings and then time would go by. It wasn't as though it was a 9-to-5 job for a couple of months. He continued therefore with his own business, and that's why we find that there are references to Henry Wisner that find him reacting to certain issues. He leaves in 1769, and the following year, 1770, we all know was the time of the Boston Massacre. And this really rouses those people in the colonies who feel that the taxation that was being imposed upon them was illegal. And then less than 3 years later, we know we have the Boston Tea Party, and Orange County people are involved in all of the discussion and upset about the taxation and the imposition that the British were putting onto them. However, as I mentioned before, Henry Wisner had this reputation of being a peacekeeper. So when the state legislature, so to speak, was looking for people to go and attend a conference, which turned out to be a convention about this issue, he was selected. Some people did not like that at all. In Blooming Grove, the Fletcher Matthews family had this terrible feeling of anxiety. Anyway, getting back, the Matthews family objected to the fact that Henry Wisner was selected to go to the convention called now the First Continental Congress. And so even though he was elected in August of that year, they objected vigorously, and so they had another election, and he re-elected by 2 votes. The first election was down in Sloatsburg, and the second election was up at the Ewelton in Chester. So with that, and his papers being legally signed by Isaac Lowe, he trots off to the Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia, only to be despised that he is followed by his agitators who tried to protest to the leaders of the Continental Congress that Henry Wisner was not qualified. Their answer said, "Are you crazy? Here you have a certificate signed by the leader of the organization, and somebody decided that he is not qualified," and they tossed it out, and Henry Wisner was allowed to be seated and to be involved. It's kind of interesting, going back and forth. We think today that the politicians are a bunch of sometimes questionable morality, but way back at this time, they did a pretty good job of being scoundrels as well. Anyway, that's just my editorial comment. All right, now, while there was all this upset about the Boston Massacre and then later the Boston Tea Party, groups of agitators and people questioning all this taxation bit joined together, and they formed committees of correspondence. And so in our own local area, we had committees of correspondence. As a matter of fact, later on in the show, I'll show the picture of the meeting house in Blooming Grove, which was very active. And just by some good fortune, the building lasted until the 1930s before it was removed for another purpose. The committees of correspondence would sit down, they would chit-chat, they would come up with theoretical strategies, they would tattletale on their neighbors. Oh, it's always fun to be a tattletale, right? You know, again, that's your exclusive information that you were passing along. And so there were these committees of correspondence before there was even the meeting at Francis Tavern in New York City, where it was legitimate to have a committee of correspondence. And we know, for example, the Allison family here, the Nickel family here in Goshen, they were very much involved in these committee activities. Here we found that the committees are appreciated, so much so that the colonial legislature has a turnover, and what's going to happen is that the new colonial legislature that comes in is going to set up other committees. It's going to set up what is called the secret committee. And the secret committee was the committee Henry Wisner and Livingston were on. And their job was to go out and look at the Hudson River and try to figure out where the best part was to, kind of a chain across. Now, there had been an attempt prior to that time to put a chain across, but it failed. That is, it did not last very long. So when this new secret committee, Henry Wisner and Livingston got together, they came up with a proposal that they gave the state legislature, and because dollars and pound shillings and pences were not that available, Wisner and others contributed largely toward the cost of the production of the chain. Anyway, the first Continental Congress that Wisner was attending was a very short one. It was about 6 weeks long. And at the time, it was, just a rumble session. And it was the second Continental Congress, which started in 1775 and lasted until we had that Articles of Confederation, that you might have heard about in school, which was the tough way of trying to run the colonies without the right to tax them. And so anyway, he was at the Second Continental Congress. At that time, he was reacting to what had happened in the First Continental Congress. And the decision was that they should try to be peaceful. Don't fight with Great Britain. Let us solve the problem. And so they put out the Olive Branch Petition. And the Olive Branch Petition simply was an attempt to have some sort of relationship with the Parliament, get them to understand their position, and they sent the message to the king. Well, what do you think the king did? Right. He said, are you guys crazy? And so it was rejected. Well, upon that happening, the Continental Congress immediately approved having an army, and the Continental Army was established, and their leader who was selected, who lasted throughout the war, was none other than George Washington, who was appointed as Commander-in-Chief. Meanwhile, our boy Wisner was going back and forth between Philadelphia and home, and he was busy working on a plan for a powder manufacturer, because one of the problems that the colonists had was that their gunpowder came from Europe. And so how could you have much of a war if you don't have any gunpowder? So he worked up a formula for gunpowder. And apparently it was quite good. And so this is before Washington had even sent out the word that he needed to have a gunpowder manufacturer set up. Anyway, he is working on this formula, and it is going to be kind of interesting. And Henry Wisner decides to modify his flour mill, producing mill in Phillips, I guess you would call it Phillipsburg today, a little hamlet across the border. And he hired a guy by the name of Moses Phillips. And Moses Phillips was a carpenter. And he took a shine to Wisner, and Wisner took a shine to him, and the mill was modified from a flour producing mill to one that could produce gunpowder. And in all of this, Mr. Moses Phillips did a nice job of smiling at Henry Wisner's daughter, and guess what happened? Yep. Yeah, they were married, and so this makes for a cozy situation. The formula that Henry Wisner came up with happened to be a pretty good one. Part of this is the fact that he was, initially a farmer at heart, and he knew that manure was an important factor in making gunpowder. And he was also aware of the fact that the manure from different animals had different chemical combinations. And so he used this information about manure, plus his information that you needed charcoal, and charcoal was very easy to get because of the woods were there. You just chop down the tree, burn them, and you had your charcoal. And then sulfur, which are the three ingredients in making gunpowder. Even today, if you have a wily kid at home who likes to work with his chemistry set, there you go. And boom, 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 that's what you have. Well, it turned out that he wrote a pamphlet about the manufacture of gunpowder, the manufacture of saltpeter, which is really the manure. And he identified in it places in Orange County and in Goshen of that time where wood supplies could be had. And if you go there, you're astounded because you think, oh, I never saw my great-great-great-grandfather's name before in a document. And there he is, a farmer. Okay, he's producing, he's bringing stuff in. And very frequently you find that these are the incidental records that help you trace an ancestor. Anyway, what happens with this pamphlet is that the state decides, oh, this is great, this is wonderful, we have something in black and white. And on top of that, Henry Wisner sent a copy to John Adams, and John Adams sends a copy to Sam Adams, and Sam Adams sends a copy to Paul Revere. Well, with all of these people saying, hey, this is a great idea, the Continental Congress goes along and promotes the idea enthusiastically to have gunpowder made. And there Henry Wisner is, standing all ready to be the merchant and the developer of this product. But he got boxed out a little bit. And one of the problems that you have with making gunpowder is that after you get the mixture together, the saltpeter and the charcoal and the sulfur, it has to sort of work together and be ground up in the mill. Then they take large trays, like you're making chocolate chip cookies, one of those big trays, and you have to put the gunpowder out, and the sun has to react on it by drying it out. Well, wouldn't you know, it rained a lot that year. And so Washington writes a letter of complaint that the powder is no good because it is damp. And so he had to come up with a solution to that problem. And he did. He didn't change the weather, but I guess he just came up with a longer cooking time for the stuff. And he decided that instead of just leaving the gunpowder out, that when it appeared prepared, he would store it in caves. Now, if any of you have gone up to Garnett, not as a patient, but you've driven up there, you know that Garnett is on a hillside. And that hillside once was much higher. And right over here was Crystal Run, which is still there, but it's hardly a run. Anyway, up in there were two caves. And years ago, like 40 years ago, I went up to that property and I scaled the side of that hill, which is now cut down so low because they're being You know, they're always changing the route there, Route 17, and every time they make a change, it gets lower and lower, and the caves have disappeared. But when I went up there, I had a wonderful time. Boy, the llama that was there from those bats was just terrific. And I will never forget that little bit of an occasion when I was seeing for sure what the problems were. Anyway, what happens is that because the formula seems to be working pretty well, the state decides that they will help with the loan to anybody who wants to build a mill and to build another mill. So, who do you think says he wants to build a mill and build another mill? Well, Henry Wisner. But he puts the request in the name of Moses Phillips. And then his son, Henry Wisner Jr., who's in Cornwall, puts in a request on behalf of the town of Goshen, or Goshen Township, and he too is looking for a favorable will. And so suddenly we have the possibility for more county mills. I think if you know the route here from 207, you take the Craig Mill Road and you're making your way down to Route 94. When you come to that intersection of Route 94, right there, that was the location of one of the mills that was built. The other one is up in Phillipsburg, and you'll be seeing the pictures later on. There was an attempt to make a second mill, and there has been a lot of interest in finding the location for the second mill. I thought at one time that the spot where that Mexican restaurant is, you're going past Garnet and you're going into Middletown, and you have the Mexican restaurant, and down there you have a spot. And I think, oh boy, isn't this a great find? Except when I looked for information to prove that was it, the farthest back I could go on the property was 1830. Which is 50 or 60 years after the time. So I'm still looking, and if you know where that second mill was, that will be very nice information if you pass it on to me. Okay, so that's what we have going there. Let me see, I already gave you the chemical composition of the gunpowder, so thank you, yes. Yes, I'm scratching. Anyway, Wisner was present for the discussions about the Declaration of Independence. We know that his signature is not on the document, but he was there. He was for the Declaration, and we know that because other documents by other people who were there indicate that he was present. However, when it came to signing, he could not sign as a New York delegate because the New York Provincial Convention had not yet come back into session. We're talking July 4th, and the convention does not come back until July 9th. And they had to give approval to allow their representative to sign in for the state. So anyway, in the meantime, it's July 4th, and the order is given that the declaration should be engrossed. That is, have the printer come and make a nice printed version, and that by the beginning of August, everybody could come back or be found and have a signature put on. Well, with that situation, and suddenly having George Washington request that Wisner not only provide more gunpowder from his mills, but also get supply of flint, he was off and on his way. And this is right in the documents of the Journal of the Continental Congress. So Wisner takes off, and he has work to do going back home. He not only has to help out and make sure that the powder production is going in the mills, but he had to find a source of flint. Now, we have a few people here from the Warwick area, so somebody can tell me maybe where you would find Flintstone? In Warwick? Come on now, you know where you find it. Okay. You're on your way to Warwick. You're going by the Cascade Creek, and as you're going down the creek, you find that there are a shape of limestone that has almost a characteristic of flint. And so you find out who the owner of that area is, and whom does it turn out to be but a fellow named Joseph Barton. Joseph Barton had married into the Wisner family. Now Henry and he sort of tolerated one another. You can't pick the members of your family. You can pick your friends, but not the members of your family. So you decide you get along. And so Barton right then was living just across the border in Sussex. It was at a time when the border between New York and New Jersey was still being debated. Anyway, Joseph Barton gets this request from Henry Wisner to get some material that looks like flint and performs that way, although it isn't exactly flint, as we have a few chemists here will tell you. So Barton goes and gets the flint supply, and it makes Henry very happy. But he got the last laugh, that is Joseph Barton, because he was a double agent. And he not only supplied flint for the Americans, but he supplied it also for the British troops. Anyway, what happens is that there is suspicion raised, and so Joseph Barton has to disappear, and he and his wife escape to New York City before they are apprehended by one of the local surveillance committees. So, be careful who your friends are. Keep them close, but keep your enemies closer. That's advice there. So, okay. In all of this and in the materials that have been made available to me, there is a story about Henry Wisner needing transportation. And I guess he must have been a fairly good horseman, because he decided that he would ride a horse from Goshen all the way down to Philadelphia. But he didn't have a horse. So he goes to the neighbors and asks around, and it turns out that there is a family in Monroe that has a few extra steeds, and they were the Reynolds family. And those of you who are from the Monroe area know where the Reynolds family is, and you've probably heard the story of what happened at the Reynolds household. Here we have this household that was obviously patriotic, that had offended Claudia Smith's gang, not Claudia Smith apparently personally, but the gang, and they decided to have a little bit of revenge. And wouldn't you know, they decided to meet at the Reynolds house, and they found Mr. Reynolds and gave him a hard time, and then thought that they had killed him, and so then they took him and strung him up and had him hang in the fireplace and let him die there. But he didn't know that Mr. Reynolds had a little daughter who happened to be looking out for him, and Rebecca comes by, and she cuts down her father and saves his life. And so to find this reference in the account about Rebecca Reynolds, and the fact that it is the Reynolds family that provide the horse to Henry Wisner to get to Philadelphia, was kind of neat. And by the way, the Congress paid the Reynolds family for the use of the horse. You couldn't always depend upon being paid because of the tight money, but I guess they thought it was worth it in this situation. The story about what happened to the Reynolds family infuriates the people in the Monroe area, and it makes them even more determined, those who were the patriots, to be watchful. I'm a daughter of a banker, so you can imagine that I would be looking at the records to see how much things cost. And I was absolutely amazed at the amount of money that not only New York Congress, but the Continental Congress gave to Henry Wisner to distribute to the suppliers the clothing, for the food, for the animals. And this was over a period of years. It was not a one-shot deal. So he must have had their complete trust and confidence. And this is certainly the sign of a very honorable man. After all, if somebody gives you money and you perhaps could skim a little bit, you just might do it. I mean, right? You just might do it. I mean, you look like an honest man, but you just might do that. Anyway, he did not do that. He apparently kept his accounts legal, and after a while, so much money went to him, I stopped counting and calculating how much was actually going through his hands. Money also went through his hands to pay for the movement of the sterling chain. He was also behind making sure that the contract with Peter Townsend was paid. And when the links got over near New Windsor, he made sure that the Brewster family was paid for their work in putting together the links. And so he had what you would say a very good credit history, and he certainly was an honorable man. Okay, so what happens next? After his occasion with Martin, we want to sort of look back a little bit. Let's see, where my little guy is here. This is Sarah, Wisner's daughter. This is Moses Phillips. And these two pictures were generously given to me by the Phillips descendants. The Phillips family used to live right here in Goshen at Phillips Place. And the descendants were very, very generous to me. They invited me down to their home in Elkhorn, Maryland. They had me stay over. They fed me. They gave me all sorts of information. They gave me the pictures. And all I could say was, boy, the attitude of the family, the Wisners, was really quite remarkable. And so it had gone all the way down to the current generation. The point that I want to show here is that all is not going to be well in Goshen. The loyalists have a problem. Not the loyalists, the rebels have a problem. The loyalists were by far the majority here. Now today we don't want to admit that, but they were the majority. And we had an interesting record of an incident that happened on the property that was now associated with the Presbyterian Church. Apparently it was time for a group to put up a liberty pole. And when you have a liberty pole, you have the girls dance around and they have the string and they, this way, this way, this way, oops, and it gets a little more sound. And things were going very well in Goshen until a rather boisterous girl comes out to the crowd and starts, well, we don't want to say cursing, but yelling and screaming that there were a bunch of idiots and that they should be loyal to the king. And this is the 16-year-old daughter of none other than Mr. Gale. Mr. Gale has a fit because he has a reputation in Goshen of being a staunch revolutionary. And here his daughter's going out there telling those in the Liberty Pole celebration that they were for it. Anyway, what happens? He goes out and he snatches her and drags her back to the house. And we don't hear any more, so we don't know how he dealt with this very difficult 16-year-old. But then again, 16-year-old girls are a problem anyway, so we'll give them a little. What happens is that as time goes by, the Gale family, by the way, some are going to be loyalists and some are going to be the Patriots, split up, and the patriotic Gale family decides, their descendants decide, as time goes by, to, oops, oh, I just lost my friend Alex. The patrons are going to, the descendants are going to decide to sell their property, which is a property that is opposite the 1841 courthouse, and they sold it so that the, I think it's the Methodist community could build their church there. Now, the Gale family also had other members who were quite generous in their philanthropy to churches and cemeteries and so on in this area. But it's kind of interesting that Daddy couldn't control his daughter. I don't know the way those things happen, right? Okay. So, another interesting 1, 2, 3. And I think we might even have a picture for it. Oh, yes. This, let's go back a little bit. When I was visiting with the Phillips family in Elton, Maryland, they gave me a bunch of pictures of family and so on. And I guess after the Civil War, someone had come by to take a picture of what had once time been the mill site. And this is a fellow standing here. And then they did an inside view of the mill at that time. Obviously, that's not a revolutionary picture. It's post-Civil War. But it was an example of the fact that there are a lot of documents that are in private hands. They're not sitting in the museum. They're not sitting in the library collection. And it's very important as researchers to get to use the human factor and to connect with people on that sort of a basis. The next interesting item that we have, that's one down here. That's gunpowder, and the gunpowder and the horn that was used to say that. I think I'll just move ahead a little bit here. That is a picture of the front of the booklet that was talking about saltpeter and gunpowder manufacture. It was printed by Sam Wooden, who had been a printer in New York City, but he moved up to Poughkeepsie, and he ran a newspaper that apparently the Loyalist was promoting their side, but he hid it within the text, some valuable information about the revolutionaries here in Goshen. And I had a friend who was quite a researcher, and he got back issues of this newspaper, and he photographed them, and gave me printouts of them. And I was just in wonderment because I had tried to find copies of that newspaper in archives around here, and they just were not available. So if you need to take a look at them, you know where I am, you can find me. Just don't call me after 11 o'clock at night, okay? Anyway, one of the interesting stories that developed is that there was a lot of black market activities going on. The revolutionaries had made a list of British goods that were not to be sold by you, no matter what side you were on. Well, you think the Loyalists are going to give a darn about that? Of course not. And so over in New Windsor, there's a shopkeeper who decides to sell, and we might have a picture of it. Oops, that's our lunch. I think I'm going to go. There we are. Bohea tea. Anyway, in his store he was selling tea. Now, a good revolutionary is not going to drink tea, right? I mean, that's too British-like. The Loyalists, well, no, we like the British, okay. And if we have the money, we'll buy the tea. So anyway, this man was selling tea, and somebody complained that he had raised the price of tea. So I happened to mention it to Wisner and Company, and they go after the guy. And they counter with him, and they say, well, what's this we hear about you're raising the price on tea? And the man responds, what? I'm not raising the price of the tea. That additional is for the cost of the paper bags. Well, this is not satisfying. So they gathered up the tea supply and they put it in the storage over at Constitution Island for a while. But there are lots of these little stories that you can pick out of the newspapers. It takes a little patience, and sometimes it's just being lucky enough to know somebody who has items that have not been worked over and would provide you with fresh material. Which, by the way, reminds me of something that happened yesterday. People know, I'm on the topic. And I get a call from this guy, and he says, you know what? Have you given that talk yet on Henry Wisner? And I said, well, no, it's tomorrow. And I'm driving in the car. I don't know where the heck I was going at that point. Anyway, he said, you know, there is a rather remote local newspaper called the Rising Star. And the Rising Star was a little publication that was put out in the Warwick area, and it really concerned itself about Belleville. And he said, I happened to get a copy of it. And you know what? I found an item in there about the Wisner family. Well, this was an 1883 article, and so I was interested, and he told me that in this article it was about Albert Wisner. Now, Albert Wisner, as you know, is the reason for the naming of the Albert Wisner Library. And he, at that time, at the time the newspaper was being put out, was the subject of discussion in a biographical sketch. And so, this was a source that I had never looked at, and I'm going to get after the guy and see if he has any other copies of this Rising Star newspaper. And he was quite happy to tell me about it, but when he realized that there was nothing about Henry Wisner, he decided, well, he'll see me next Wednesday and bring it into the office. So good luck on that part, huh? Good luck on that. But that's what I mean, these things happen. And then 2 weeks ago, one of my friends and I were at Limoncello's. We were going to have lunch together there. And so I'm driving into the parking lot behind Limoncello's, and all of a sudden my phone rings. And I get a call from this guy. He sounded like a nice person. He said his last name was Mr. Baird, and that he had come across recently an account book and going through some antiques. And in there was a reference to the owner of the account book years ago, whose last name, I guess, was Pierce, in which he indicated that he was leaving off at Wisner's mill a quantity of gunpowder. Now, how do you like that? After 200 and some years, that suddenly that little bit of information is showing up. Anyway, I guess my telephone number is too well known. But that was a good fun. But I think personal relationships help you a tremendous bit. Like I said, it's nice to go into the library, it's nice to go into the museum and the archive, but I think a personal contact is one of the bits of armament that is most helpful if you're hunting for stuff. Okay, now, what shall we tell you about? I guess I can tell you about the committees and correspondence that were being very busy. The picture that I have here is given out at Williamsburg. If you want to have a replica of what the Black Sea was, the Bohemian Sea, colonial Bohemian, they sell it in one of their shops. The item has a black tea blend, and it's actually the leaves that they put in the container to replicate the way in which you would have received it otherwise. And so I think we want to, let's see, Bill, I think we'll go back this way. Okay, committees of correspondence. This is the picture of the house in Blooming Grove. And if I tell you where it is, you'll say, oh yeah, I know that place. If anybody here from Blooming Grove know where the Blooming Grove post office is? Okay, well, all right, we'll put you on Route 94. You're leaving Chester and you're going to Washingtonville. You find the little Blooming Grove post office and you go up the way. See, somebody knows now. And the spot is marked there. That was the home for the Brewster family, and they were very active in the committees of correspondence. And for some lucky reason, that house lasted a long, long time to make it possible to have this sort of a picture made. But there are other spots here in Goshen Village that saw committees of correspondence. That was one of the kinds of committees that the legislature was like to see, because it decided to come up with special committees. One was the secret committee, and the secret committee was the one that Henry Wisner and Livingston were on when they were looking for a spot for the change. But they also established two other kinds of committees. One was called the Committee for Detecting and Defeating Conspiracies. Now, this meant that you tattletale to them what your suspicions were, and then we go and examine the person and see if they really were any threat to the rebel cause. And if they were, they could be arrested and thrown into jail, common jail, with the thieves, the crooks, the non-payers, the debtors, the assaulters, and whatnot. And the favorite place was right here in Goshen. It was the Goshen jail. It was a brand new Goshen jail that was built because the jail that had been in the basement of what is now Limoncello's was just in terrible shape. I remember many, many years ago having gone into the basement of Limoncello's, and I saw on the floor the remainder of the iron clasps that they used to chain the prisoners so that they wouldn't get away. Now that's gone. A lot of other things have gone out of that building, but that was a long time ago, and maybe some of you here had the same experience of having a little tour and seeing that. The new jail was built right across the street, and it's the location now. I think it's at the health department that's in there, that yellow building. I'm not too sure.
Yes.
Mental health. Somebody know what's in that building?
The health department.
Is that what it is? Anyway, that was the site of the new jail. And this really was a very fancy jail. It had 2 floors, and you could pack a lot of people in, and in the back of the building, you had a playground. You could go out there and get fresh air. You could have your family come and have a meal with you. They had no cafeteria service, so if you wanted to eat, you had to have somebody supply you with the food. And so this was the place where they then decided not only to send the thieves and common criminals, but send anybody who was suspected by the Committee for Detecting and Defeating Conspiracies should go. I had a lot of fun with one of the people here in the audience who wrote a very nice article about that Goshen jail. And it was interesting because it was really not intended to be a holding spot, except that there was no other convenient space right at that time. And so it wasn't a prisoner of war camp, but it acted as a prisoner of war camp. This is particularly telling for those of you who know the story of a famous infamous person who was a friend of Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold was a friend of the Smith family. Now the Smiths, there are lots of Smith families, but this was the Smith family whose forebearer was a very prominent judge for the New York colony. Anyway, what happened is that this gentleman had a descendant whose name was Joshua Hecht Smith. And Joshua Hecht Smith lived in the house in Rockland County that's now called the Treason House. And it's called the Treason House because Benedict Arnold and John Andre and Joshua Hecht Smith sat together and argued and debated and talked for an overnight session. Anyway, what happens is that when Benedict Arnold gets involved with his treachery and moves ahead, his companion John Andre is captured, as you recall, and he is hanged. And what happens to Joshua Hecht Smith? Well, this guy takes off, and he escapes captured for a while, but finally they find him, and they drag him up to the Goshen jail, and here he is, stuck and muttering. And his wife would come and visit and make sure that he had food and occasionally a change of clothes. And it just so happened that they cooked up a little plan of how this man could escape. And so one night, what happened was that his wife comes with a set of clothing, and the clothing were women's clothes. And so Joshua Hecht Smith suddenly has women's clothes put on, and he escapes the Goshen jail under the guise of being a judge in women's clothes. And so he takes off and he goes down South Church Street and down toward Chester on the old back road. And then suddenly he becomes aware that there might be somebody following him. So he takes off into one of the houses there and hides as a woman. Well, the person he suspects goes by, and if you ever read the book, Accomplice in Treason, this is part of a story that talks about his adventures in Goshen, the houses that he met, the people who helped him, and you'll often feeling after a while, there were an awful lot of loyalists in Goshen precinct, and it's a good source to have. Okay, so now we've gotten out of the jail, and we continue with the war. Oh, let's see where we go. We did our committee of correspondence. Well, okay, you've arrested the guy, you find him in jail, you find him guilty, now what do you do? Well, what do you do is that you then send it on to another committee for action. This is the committee for confiscation, that is taking the property, and cessploitation, which means selling it at auction or however you can. And what happens is that this is the way in which the Goshen Committee and other committees were able to get a few extra funds, because they would sell property that was stolen and sell it to somebody else for a profit. Well, this is all very interesting, except that we now know that there was a lot of speculation going on. And some of the British officers thought that it was a done deal, that the British were going to win. And one of these officers was no other than the British General Henry Clinton. And he buys a large parcel in Walk Hill, all the way stretching down to Montgomery, several thousand acres. Well, for Clinton, he lost his bet, and he lost his shirt, he lost his property. And the committee for sequestration there turns around and he sells it to whom? To the rebels, such as those in the Mills family, M-I-L-L-S family. The Mills family had been, what do you call them? Blacksmith. Yeah, blacksmith. No, that is it. What do you call it? The guy who goes and, does iron work. Anyway, that family goes and acquires part of the property, and the papers remain in the family all that time, all the way down to 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, the family came to me and they gave me 5 different parcels of this land. And the documentation that it was his property, sold to X number, and the amount that was involved. Again, a story where it's personal contact that often brings in some of these nuggets. And we have the papers down at the Orange County Historical Society if you ever want to look and touch something that affected Henry Clinton, British Henry Clinton. Okay, so that was what the Committee of Sequestration did. Am I running out of time?
Yeah, 10 minutes max.
10 minutes, okay. All right, Michelle, be quiet. I'll see what we'll do. All right. One of the tragedies that was suffered in the Wisner family was that Henry's son Gabriel died at the Battle of Minnesink. And at the Battle of Minnesink, we have a picture here of a soldier and a doctor. And those of you in Goshen may be familiar with the story about Dr. Benjamin Tustin. There were 2 Dr. Benjamin Tustins, Daddy and Sonny. When Sonny was growing up, Daddy thought he was kind of on the weak side and he wouldn't make much of a farmer. So he suggested that he go off to school and either become a lawyer or a doctor. Well, Tustin does just that, and he comes back to Goshen and he apprentices with Dr. Thomas Wickham, and then he decides he'd like to go out on his own. And one of the reasons he wanted to go out on his own was because he had been hearing about the scourge of smallpox. And as you know, smallpox was a very viral disease at that time. It affected the Americans, but didn't affect the British soldiers so much because when they lived in Europe and on the continent, they had built up an immunity because of the fact that the disease had already spread and had, made them immune or less likely to get the disease. Anyway, by 1770, before the war, Tustin decides to set up medical service, and again, you probably know the story. He found 4 places here in Goshen Precinct where he set up houses. And at these houses, he stored people who had accepted the inoculations. You needed 7 to 9 days to really have the disease flourish, and then you had to endure the disease, and if you were lucky, you could live. Anyway, this idea of vaccination wasn't particularly appreciated. George Washington thought, well, maybe this isn't such a good idea. But when his soldiers were suffering and being lost to the smallpox, he thought to change his tune. Anyway, Benjamin Tustin, in the meantime, had set up these 4 houses. There was one out on the Sarah Rose Trail, there was one at Hamptonburg, there was one at Stony Ford Farm area, and there was one over in the swamp area, Cedar Swamp, I think it's called. So what happens is that people become aware of the disease, and Benjamin Tustin is at the battle, and he refuses to leave because the men are dying and he wants to care for them. He is going to be tomahawked, and that's sort of the end of Benjamin Tustin's son, or Benjamin Tustin's father, picks up again his medical practice and continues for a while. This is what it looks like when you have smallpox. What happens is that you get all these little pustules, you scratch them, you itch them, it's very infectious, and this is a severe case, but it gives you some idea why it was so dreaded. Many people died from the disease. But on the other hand, the way to get your inoculation was that you had to take one of these, scratch somebody's arm, put it on, put a tape on it, let time go by, and let the immunity to smallpox occur. One of the interesting things in medical journals is sometimes you come across historical facts. And one of the items that I've seen occasionally is that it's been speculated that George Washington may have had a slight reaction when he was a young man. And as you know, one of the effects of a severe smallpox infection is that you become sterile. And we know that George Washington never had children with his wife, Martha Washington, who did have children with her first husband before he died. And so this theory shows up every once in a while in history, medical journals, that perhaps that was the reason why George Washington never had children. Okay, you can decide for yourself about that, but anyway, we're just passing it along. At the same battle site, and what do we have now, 5 minutes left? Okay, 5 minutes left. I better run through and pass by the story about John Wood at the Battle of Minnesota. Wisner helped this man who came back from the battle. His wife thought that he had been lost at the battle, so she remarried. And the guy comes to Wisner and says, help me out, you know, I want him to be married. So Wisner goes to the legislature and he gets a special law passed, giving him a divorce, and that resolves the problem. He returns back to his work as a blacksmith in Goshen, and the records of that blacksmith shop remain, and they are a great source of information about local people who lived here in Goshen. Okay, then was it for boy 100-year? Well, in the meantime, he had been involved on the committee to establish the New York State Constitution. He also helped Noah Webster. Noah Webster worked for 1 year at what we call the Farmers Hall Academy in 1782. Wisner helps him out by writing him a letter of recommendation so that he can go to New Jersey to friends who will help him find a printer for his blue back speller. Anyway, what happens is that I don't have a picture of him as a young man, but here he is as a wiser man. Okay, the Farmers Hall School is now incorporated within the bounds of the Goshen Town Hall, and we tried very hard, Henry Wisner tried very hard to get sort of a legal standard for the Farmers Hall Academy. And so in 1784, he was appointed to the commission to establish a board of regents at the University of the State of New York. And so he was a commissioner, and that was supposed to encourage good education, but what happened was that for the first bunch of years, they only considered colleges and universities, and their problems with Columbia University being established from the former Loyalist King's College. Anyway, time goes by. Finally, in 1790, Henry Wisner finds that the issue of getting papers and documentation for Farmers Hall Academy has been approved. At this point, he is a 70-year-old man. The papers are about to be issued on March 23rd. And let you know that he dies on March 4th, 1790, never to see the conclusion of what he had worked for. I am getting signals from over there, so I have say, in conclusion, if you are interested, that is the Wisner house where the powder mill was. That's the historic marker, and here, up on the hillside, outside the house where the mill was, is this historic marker standing on the field. If you know where the Walk Hill Cemetery is, And way in the back, the highest part, that is where his grave is. Okay, now.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was great.